Tyrone Bowman live. Welcome to the conversation on this evening. Welcome to the program. Let's get right down to it. According to the Washington Journal, Ukraine agrees to the mineral rights deal with the United States. Trump says he will meet Friday with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. So let's get right down to it. Ukraine has agreed to a mineral rights deal with the U.S. that could be finalized as soon as Friday at a White House meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. People close to the negotiations said the text had now been agreed, and the U.S. had dropped its previous demand for the right to $500 billion in potential revenue from the development of Ukraine's mineral resources. It's a very big deal. It could be a $1 trillion deal, Trump told reporters Tuesday. We are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on Ukraine and Russia fighting a war that should have never happened. The signing ceremony would be a personal victory for Zelensky, who has been pushing for a face-to-face meeting with Trump, but has instead had to watch as the U.S. opened discussions with Moscow about how to end the war, including Ukraine or excluding Ukraine. The Ukrainian president had refused to sign the mineral rights deal presented by a low-level official, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Zelensky's refusal to sign off of a rapid deterioration in the relationship between Washington and Kyiv. The Ukrainian president had said for months that Ukraine's allies in the war against Russia could have access to the country's mineral resources. However, he said he couldn't sign an agreement that didn't include security guarantees for Ukraine. Officials across Europe also expressed shock at some of the demands the U.S. had made in the offer, including the right to up to $500 billion in revenue from mineral development, which is far more than the U.S. has contributed to Ukraine since Russia's invasion began. I don't want something that 10 generations of Ukrainians will have to pay back, he said at a news conference on Sunday. After Zelensky refused the initial offer, Trump called him a dictator and falsely accused Ukraine of starting the war. Top officials met with their Russian counterparts to discuss how to end the conflict without Ukraine, and the U.S. voted against a United Nations resolution condemning Russia's invasion. Though the new text doesn't include security guarantees, Ukrainian officials hope it can reset the country's relationship with Trump. Trump said there would be peacekeepers in Ukraine, but didn't say if the U.S. would provide any support or troops to the deterrence mission. Despite Russia's opposition to European forces in Ukraine, Trump assured reporters on Tuesday the agreement would include a form of peacekeeping that's acceptable to everybody. The agreement on the final text of a deal was earlier reported by the Financial Times. Under the terms of the agreement, Ukraine would pay some proceeds from future mineral resource developments to a fund that would invest in projects in Ukraine. Resources that already make money for the Ukrainian government, such as existing oil and gas production, will be exempt from the deal. The size of the U.S. stake in the fund and joint ownership deals will be hashed out in future agreements. Up to now, the U.S. has been Ukraine's largest supporter during the war, spending more than $100 billion in aid, more than $100 billion in aid to the country, including nearly $70 billion in military aid. However, Trump's statements in recent days have jolted not only Kyiv, but leaders across Europe. We have held a series of meetings over the past week to plan for how they could aid Ukraine if the U.S. pulled its support. Without U.S. support, current and former Western officials says Ukraine is well equipped to keep fighting at the same intensity, at least until summer. After that, however, Kyiv could find itself short of ammunition and unable to use some of its most sophisticated weaponry. Hoping to further distance Washington from Kyiv, the Kremlin recently floated an offer to give the U.S. access to mineral resources in Russia and in Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine, Europe. Meanwhile, put together its own mineral rights offer for Ukraine. you can't, you can't make this up. I can't. I don't. Alina President and CEO of the Center for European Politics think tank in Washington, said Ukraine's agreement with the U.S. can leverage in peace talks with Russia. It should be something big that the U.S. demands from Moscow, as this was a big concession from Ukraine, she said. Ukraine is believed to have deposits of at least 20 of the 50 minerals that the U.S. considers critical. These include lithium, graphite, titanium, uranium, and rare earths, a collection of 17 elements that are essential for everything from cell phones to the defense industry. Their collective potential value is estimated to be trillions of dollars, according to industry analysts. However, up to 40% of those mineral deposits are in areas of the countries currently under Russian occupation. Much of what is under Ukrainian control has never been mined, making them commercially viable. Will, in some senses, require years of studies and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, capital that will be difficult to raise while the war is still going on. This article was written for the Washington Journal by Alexander Ward at alex.ward at wsj.com. Well, let me ask you a question in closing. What about those that are starving here in America? What about homelessness, high unemployment? What about the price of eggs and gas and milk and everyday needs that Americans need? What about poverty that's going on in this nation? This is something that the MAGA Republicans don't want to talk about because they think people have dull memories. Midterm elections are coming up. Project 2026. Never surrender. Never forget.